North Korea missile launch. President Trump demands global action as Kim Jong-un vows to continue his country's weapons program. Saving baby Charlie. A Vatican hospital offers to help a terminally ill child while President Trump weighs in on the controversy. Remembering Cardinal Meisner.
It's an end of an era in many ways.
An outspoken leader in the church passes away. We look back on his legacy in a report from Rome. And a bid for recognition. The mission to restore and protect Jordan's cultural heritage, including a Catholic church dating back to the Ottoman Empire. On EWTN News Nightly for Wednesday, July 5th, 2017. Good evening, and thank you for joining us for News from a Catholic Perspective. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump faces a series of foreign policy challenges. He's traveling to Warsaw, Poland for a brief visit before moving on to the G20 Leadership Summit in Germany. The international trip will also provide the first face-to-face meeting between Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. They're divided on several thorny issues, including Russian involvement in Ukraine and Syria. President Trump is calling out China for doing too little to crack down on North Korea. It comes as his administration searches for new ways to confront the communist nation after its unprecedented test of a missile capable of hitting the U.S. Correspondent Mark Irons reports from the White House. Good evening, Mark.
Good evening, Wyatt. North Korea's launch of an intercontinental ballistic missile shows a dangerous new reach for its weapons. As the U.S. demands global action, the Trump White House is finding that putting pressure on China, North Korea's biggest trading partner, is not working.
President Trump chastised China on Twitter for failing to do more to cut off support to North Korea. He says trade between China and North Korea grew almost 40% in the first quarter. So much for China working with us, but we had to give it a try. Meanwhile, North Korean leader Kim Jong-un is vowing to never curb his country's weapons program. This, a day after successfully testing the country's first intercontinental ballistic missile. President Trump personally responded on Twitter saying, "Perhaps China will put a heavy move on North Korea and end this nonsense once and for all." But some experts say it's no surprise that China is not acting.
It's in China's interest to keep North Korea kind of where it is, and if that means a few weapons tests here and there, they will basically allow those to happen.
The Trump administration says it's looking at all options, including military action.
The fact is, this is a rogue regime.
But Tony Perez, an expert in just war theory, says that so far a military response would not be morally justified.
The just war criteria require a just cause, and self-defense would be a just cause, and immediate response to an immediate preemptive threat of use of force by North Korea would be a legitimate use of power by the United States. It's hard to see that the right of self-defense applies here.
Officials from the U.S., South Korea, and Japan called for an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council held this afternoon in New York. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson is trying to rally help from other countries, saying global action is required to stop a global threat. Wyatt?
Mark, North Korea has launched missiles before. What's the significance of this launch?
That's right. North Korea has demonstrated missiles of short and medium range, but not a long-range intercontinental missile. The fear is that North Korea could potentially arm one of these missiles with a nuclear warhead and target the U.S.
Potentially very alarming indeed. Correspondent Mark Irons at the White House. Thanks, Mark. The baby at the center of an international dispute is still on life support in a London hospital despite an offer from the Vatican to help. The European Court of Human Rights ruled last week a British hospital can discontinue life support for Charlie Gard. The terminally ill boy's case has sparked a debate over who makes decisions for patients on life support. Charlie's parents want the hospital to release their son so they can take him to the U.S. for treatment. The Vatican Children's Hospital has also offered to treat him, but the UK won't allow the transfer. Pope Francis has voiced his support for Charlie and his parents. President Trump is also weighing in on the controversy on Twitter. He says, if we can help little Charlie Gard, as per our friends in the UK and the Pope, we would be delighted to do so. The president did not elaborate on what kind of help would be offered. The hospital offering to help Charlie Gard finds itself under the spotlight tonight. An Associated Press investigation found the Children's Hospital focused more on profits than on its young patients. The Vatican Secretary of State acknowledges there were problems at the Bambino Gesù in the past, but he says the new administration is making a serious effort to resolve them.
What I saw was immunosuppressed children, children that had obviously had chemotherapy, children that we knew that their immune system had been affected, and yet they were sitting in overcrowded conditions on unsanitary conditions.
American nurse Colleen McMahon was part of a task force to investigate issues at the hospital. The facility now has new leaders who are working to correct the problems. The U.S. military says an attack in southern Afghanistan killed a 19-year-old soldier from Alaska and injured 2 other American troops. Fighting with the Taliban has become more intense, leading to the recent increase in U.S. military deaths and injuries. Iraqi forces in Mosul battle for the last pocket of territory still occupied by ISIS. Some 300 ISIS fighters remain in a small section of the city. A large number of civilians are believed to be trapped in the neighborhoods. ISIS captured Mosul in a matter of days when it swept across northern and central Iraq in the summer of 2014. Iraqi forces backed by a U.S.-led coalition launched a major operation to retake the city in October. Venezuela's humanitarian crisis has left the country on the brink of collapse. Many people are fleeing across the border for help. This woman couldn't take one more step. She barely made it from Venezuela to Colombia. She needs a doctor, like tens of thousands of others desperately crossing the border. Once one of Latin America's wealthiest countries, Venezuela now faces severe shortages of food and medicine. The 20-year-old mother says her baby has meningitis, and if she didn't bring him to Colombia, he would have died. Doctors in Venezuela diagnosed him, but didn't have the medication to treat him. As recently as March, the country was lacking 80% of basic medical supplies, according to one of the country's pharmaceutical trade groups. Dr. Zulma Urbina sometimes feels powerless when patients get to Colombia and it's too late. The emergency room is so full, patients from Venezuela are now lining the hallways. Doctors say it's compromising quality of care. Even though the hospital doesn't have enough beds, it refuses to turn anyone away. Dr. Urbina wants to give every patient a chance to survive. But the healthcare system in this border town, doctors warn, is unsustainable. The hospital in Colombia expects to treat double the number of Venezuelans this year over last year. Many in the church are stunned over the death of Cardinal Meisner. The German cardinal was the former Archbishop of Cologne and was a leading Orthodox voice. Today, people are remembering the outspoken cardinal.
He was a hero, and he was a friend of mine. No, and he loved, as I said, he believed just everything. He believed in the incarnation, he believed everything. He was a real pastor.
Last year, Meisner and 3 other cardinals wrote to Pope Francis for clarification on the Holy Father's letter, The Joy of Love. Cardinal Joachim Meisner was 83 years old. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register, joins us. Edward, Cardinal Meisner's death has come as a surprise. What do we know about how he passed away?
Well, I believe it happened this morning after breakfast. He was preparing for Mass, and he fell asleep and passed away in his sleep with a breviary in his hand, according to Cardinal Rainer Volki of Cologne. But it was unexpected. I didn't think he had any particular illness that we knew of. So it came as quite a shock, especially to the church in Germany as well.
Tell us a little bit about Cardinal Meisner's background for people who are unfamiliar.
Well, Cardinal Meisner grew up in what was communist Eastern Germany, and of course a town which was German and is now Polish, became Polish after the Second World War. So he had a lot of experience of growing up under communism, of dealing with dictatorships, and that's what really gave him the fire in his belly, if you like, to defend the church's teaching on so many issues, particularly the life issues. And so that was his background. He's very close to John Paul II, and particularly close to Benedict XVI. In fact, I understand he only spoke to him only yesterday, to Benedict XVI, just before he died.
Well, as you mentioned, Cardinal Meisner was highly regarded in the church for being a strong defender of the faith. How did he stand up for church's teaching?
Well, he really stood up for the life issues, as I said, particularly abortion and euthanasia. He was very strong on criticizing secularism and the effect of secularism on society. All around, he was very, very strong on these issues, which brought him into conflict, of course, with many people in Germany, which has become very secular in itself. But of course, he also put his name to the dubia, the 5 questions that were sent to the Holy Father asking for clarification on Amoris Laetitia, his post-apostolic exhortation, post-synodal apostolic exhortation. And one of those cardinals who also put his name to it, Cardinal Burke, praised him and gave tribute to him today as well, saying that he was a good and faithful servant who had inspired him deeply.
How does Cardinal Meisner's death now impact the College of Cardinals?
Well, he was over 80, so that means he wouldn't have had a vote in the next conclave. But he was 83 when he died. But that means that the total number of cardinals comes down from 225 to 224. But as I say, he wasn't going to vote. But he was one of John Paul II's appointments as cardinal, and so it's an end of an era in many ways in that sense.
Yes, and I'm sure so many of our EWTN viewers will be praying for the repose of his soul. Edward Penton, Rome correspondent for EWTN's National Catholic Register. Thanks so much for the update, Edward.
Thanks, Wyatt.
Pope John Paul II's longtime spokesperson has also died. Joaquin Navarro Valls ran the Vatican press office for over 20 years. He was fiercely loyal to John Paul, accompanying the Polish Pope on most of his international trips. The doctor-turned-journalist also helped make the Vatican more international. Navarro Valls was 80 years old. On Twitter, the current director of the Holy See press office, Greg Burke, posted this picture saying, "Keep smiling." Coming up, critical conversation.
They're more intense because of social media.
The pressure facing teens and why it's so important to talk to them about suicide prevention. And the joy of the gospel. Thousands of Catholic leaders in the U.S. focus on how to share the good news. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby in for Lauren Ashburn. A Netflix series called 13 Reasons Why tells the story of a teenage girl's suicide based on the book by Jay Asher. 2 families claim the show triggered their children's deaths. One of many reasons why our next guest says it's important for parents to discuss suicide with their children. Joining us now is Roy Pettifies with the Pax Renewal Center, which provides therapy grounded in Christian faith. Roy has also studied at the Pontifical University of St. Thomas Aquinas in Rome. Well, according to the Centers for Disease Control, suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 34-year-olds. Roy, this is an alarming statistic. How big of an issue is this?
It's the biggest issue concerning young people right now because their lives are on the line. And it's one that we as a church are becoming increasingly aware. And just getting back from the convocation in Orlando yesterday, it's one that our bishops and the leaders in our church are taking very seriously.
You know, Roy, you say this new Netflix series accurately portrays the pressures teenagers face, like depression and cyberbullying. How have those pressures changed over the years?
They've changed. They've become more complex. They're more intense because of social media, because of the breakdown of family resources, interpersonal resources for teens. And so those pressures have become a lot more intense because resources that were formerly available to them aren't there. And because so many folks are unavailing themselves of religion and religious practice, that's another major support that we're just not taking advantage of in many cases. So that intensifies the pressures.
Well, noting those pressures, how can parents then have a meaningful conversation with their children about the issue?
One would be to speak about the issue directly. Don't mince words about suicide. Don't mince words about bullying and cyberbullying and about sexuality. Secondly would be to listen. Listen to teens. That's so much of what they need is to feel heard. And as parents, we get into a place of fear. And so we go into our reactive mode. And teens don't need us to fix the problem. They really just need to feel heard. And so practicing some listening skills would just go a long way. And then thirdly, don't be afraid if you're uncertain to get help for your teen. Reach out to your pastor, reach out to your church, reach out to a mental health professional.
The church teaches us that suicide is a sin. What are some of the ways you can educate young people about the importance of life and the value of human life?
Absolutely. And, you know, the church teaches that suicide is a sin, that it's certainly grave matter. Thankfully, our understanding, informed by science, of how severe of a mental health condition normally it pre-exists one taking their own life, has given us a bit of compassion, hopefully, around the nature. But we definitely want to let teens know that it is a moral issue, while it is also a mental health issue, and it's not one to be taken lightly. Teens want to talk about this issue with adults, but too often we adults fear the copycat syndrome, right? We fear that we're going to cause it and suggest it by talking about it, and that's not the case. If anything adults get out of this, I want them to not be afraid, because that won't cause suicide. In fact, it will relieve the pressures. Teens want to talk about it.
Well, I know these can be such tough issues when you talk about depression and suicide, but it is important, as you say, Roy, that we bring it to light. Roy Pettifice of the PAX Renewal Center, thanks so much for talking with us about it.
Thank you, Wyatt.
A gathering of Catholic leaders from across the United States just wrapped up in Orlando, Florida. The U.S. bishops who sponsored the meeting say the goal was to assess the challenges and opportunities for the church in America. Dr. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor and senior editor with National Catholic Register, covered the meeting in Orlando. So Matthew, over 3,000 church leaders were there. Tell us what you learned about the landscape of the Catholic Church.
When you bring together 3,000 leaders from across the United States in such a dazzling variety of ministries, you're going to get a lot of different perspectives. And one of the things that's very clear is that there are a host of challenges facing the country today. We have secularism, we have relativism, we've got the problems of the nuns, N-O-N-S's, the millennials who are really connecting themselves in no faith at all. But then we've got immigration problems, we've got economic problems. But at the same time, when you bring together these leaders, you also discover that a lot of people are creating wonderful solutions on the local level. Cardinal Donald Wuerl, in his presentation at the convocation, made an important point. He said that the situations are always changing, but the teachings of the church don't. We have to find new ways to apply those teachings and to really instill in everyone a sense of missionary discipleship.
What is so significant about this meeting, or convocation as you call it?
Yeah, well, it's never been done before. You have to go back 100 years, all the way back to 1917, in the middle of World War I, to find anything really approaching this. What they wanted to do was to bring all of the dioceses together, not just dioceses, but also apostolates and religious communities, to talk, just to interact with each other, to discuss and get to know each other, to network, to decide, and really to point out to each other what's working, what isn't working.
Archbishop Jose Gomez of Los Angeles spoke on day 3 of the convocation, talking about his vision for the church as well as his own personal faith and developing that. Let's take a listen to what he said about his personal story.
I'm going with my friends, no car. I'm going to Mass, yeah, take the kids, you know. Honestly, when I reflect on my life, making that decision to go to daily Mass changed my life. And look where I am.
Tell me about Archbishop Gomez's message.
Yeah, that was just one moment of what I thought was one of the highest of the highlights of this convocation. Archbishop Gomez laid out his vision for what we understand to be the peripheries. And he looked at the question in this way. He said the peripheries are not just geographical, they're not just sociological, but they're spiritual. And the very next day, we had a convocation gathering together to do a Eucharistic procession through the streets of Orlando into the hotel, on the very day also that we're talking about religious liberty. So the public witness of the Eucharist, and we hear from Archbishop Gomez the incredible power, the transforming power of the Eucharist in your life, was an anchor for the convocation, but we're also reminded of what the true peripheries are.
Yes, reaching out to those on the marginalized and those, like I said, on the edges of society. Matthew Bunson, EWTN senior contributor and senior editor with the National Catholic Register. Thanks so much for telling us about it.
Great to be with you.
Up next, Rome Insider.
With Pope Francis, there's this interest in people just seeing who he is and what he's saying, what he's doing.
What it's like to cover the Vatican. And a Catholic church in Jordan could soon be added to the list of World Heritage Sites.
No olvidemos nunca que nuestra alegría es Jesucristo.
The Vatican announces the Pope's monthly prayer intention for July. This month, Pope Francis is praying for those who have strayed away from the faith. The Holy Father says he's praying that with our words and actions, our brothers and sisters may rediscover the beauty of Christian life. Welcome back. I'm Wyatt Goolsby, in for Lauren Ashburn. Lauren recently spoke with our Alan Holdren, who's now the newly appointed EWTN bureau chief in Rome, about his experience covering the Vatican.
Welcome to Washington, D.C.
It's nice to be here.
So nice to have you. You are a Cornhusker State boy, born and bred, and you are now Rome's bureau chief for EWTN. Tell me how that happened.
Well, if you ask my mom, she'd say Providence, right? and I feel the same way. I was engaged to be married to an Italian, and I got engaged in August, and in, I think, October of 2009, I got the job offer to go to Rome. So it came up right in the right moment. We got married that year.
And your mother is really disappointed because you're not in Nebraska, right?
My mom's from England,
oh,
so
all
it gives her an
right.
excuse
So you're
to
just a
come over.
potpourri, so she's fine with all of that. You've covered 2 popes, 3 popes?
2 popes.
2 popes, right. So you've covered Benedict and now Francis. What is the difference? What are the challenges in covering those popes?
You know, with Benedict, the interesting thing was there were so many people that had such strong opinions about who he was and what he said. And if it was a negative opinion, you'd ask them, have you ever read anything or listened to anything he said? And the answer was inevitably no. So you'd invite them to look into it a little bit more and then give you an impression. It was so hard for a journalist just to get somebody to read what he was saying and to understand it. Beautiful messages. Everything he said, everything he did was so meek and so beautiful, so well studied, but he was so misunderstood. With Pope Francis, there's this interest in people just seeing who he is and what he's saying, what he's doing, even if it's just a little soundbite, because he speaks in sound bites. He's an amazing communicator, but his gestures, his closeness to people is really so communicative on its own. So they give him that chance.
I remember meeting him and just feeling this aura of peace. You've traveled with him.
Yeah.
What is it like to travel with him, and what have you learned about him on your trips?
It's nonstop. The man,
Yeah,
he's 80
that's
years
true.
old, but
You
he
did 20 different visits here in Washington.
Yeah, it was, I mean,
Washington, not just New York and Philadelphia.
It was on an 8 or 9 day total trip. He came from Cuba before that. You're dealing with jet lag. The fact that we as journalists sleep probably 4 or 5 hours max a night when we're traveling with the Pope. He has this schedule that just keeps on going. He meets with people, even when he's not meeting officially publicly with people, he's meeting behind the scenes with people or celebrating private masses. You hear about it later and you think, how is this man doing it? And then he gets back to Rome and he starts with his regular schedule of meetings the next day.
I don't know where he gets that energy. I do, the Holy Spirit, right?
That's right.
So that's probably what happens,
You
right?
really do see it.
Well, we are just delighted to have you here in Washington, and I love your reports from Rome, and I'm looking forward to working with you more in the future.
Well, thank you so much. Nice to be here.
One of the oldest cities in Jordan wants its landmarks included on the United Nations World Heritage List. The city of Salt asked the UN to grant special status to 22 yellow sandstone buildings constructed during the Ottoman era, including St. Mary Catholic Church. The church has a newly renovated shrine dedicated to St. Marie Alphonsine, who became a saint in 2015. One of the architects helping with the bid says the city continually mixes the old and the new.
People are still using it. People are still living in them. They still have shops in them. So it's living. The city is breathing, and the people still have their dignity, their tradition, their hospitality.
Getting World Heritage status would help restore and protect the buildings by generating income through tourism. The World Heritage Committee is currently meeting in Poland and will make a decision soon. And we thank you for watching tonight. For the entire EWTN News Nightly team, I'm Wyatt Goolsby. We leave you with a look at how our anchor, Lauren Ashburn, celebrated her birthday yesterday. She went skydiving while on vacation with her family. We wish Lauren a happy birthday. She'll be back here next week at the anchor desk and on both feet. I'll see you tomorrow. Good night and God bless.